famous stories that Jesus told from scriptures. You know, obviously Jesus was a master storyteller, and he used parables to tell us the truth of things that he wanted us to know. So, I want to read the story of the prodigal son. You all know this story, but I want to take a couple minutes to give us all a good reminder. And Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that falls. And he divided his living between them. Many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took his journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property and loose living. And when he had spent everything, a great famine arose in that country, and he began to be in want. So he went and joined himself to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed the swine. And he would gladly have fed on the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he rose and came to his father. But while he was yet at a distance, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and make merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to make merry. Now his elder son was in the field. And as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked him what this meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him safe and sound. The older son was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, all these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a kid that I might make merry with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your living with harlots and killed for him the fatted calf, and you killed for him the fatted calf. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to make merry and be glad. For this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. You know, in the culture and the society that we live in, we have really no good understanding of how radical this story is. Those that heard Jesus tell this story would have been flabbergasted. Because in that culture, family is everything. And honor is everything. So for the son to say this to his father, give me my inheritance now, he's saying, you're dead to me. Give me what's mine. I want it now. And the affront in that society would have just been over the top. I want to use this story to try to kind of highlight how I think things go in our spiritual life and what's possible. And so I ended up one day just having this thought and idea, and it really involves a tree. Now, a lot of you aren't going to be able to see this. You can take a picture later if you want to. So imagine we're going to draw a tree here. If I have a pen that works. Maybe not. So a tree grows out of the ground, and down here, this is God. And the tree has roots, and those trees are rooted in God, and the tree only comes from God. I mean, without God, this tree doesn't exist. Okay? So imagine this tree is your life. without God, you don't exist. It's not possible. And at the beginning of our life, we're just here in union with God. You know, think of your child or your grandchild. They're running around, having a good time. They're just in union with God. This was true for you. At some point in your life, in your earliest days, you were just one with God. Then at some point, you had this feeling that something was kind of amiss. We start to grow up into ourselves and we start to wonder what this is all about. And we have this feeling of separation. So we start to think that I'm not really one with God. And that takes us in one of two directions. So on one side, we have the prodigal son. So this is the younger son. And he basically rejects, for our purposes here, he rejects his faith. He says, I don't need to do this God thing. I'm going to take my money that I got from Dad, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to live the good life. I don't need to be one with God. And so I'm going to look for these objects and these experiences. And that's where I'm going to find the fun times that I want to have. On the other side of the equation, we have the older son. And he doesn't reject his faith. He stays there with the Father. What he does is he doubles down on being perfect. So he's starting to try to live this perfect life. But the problem there is he's not doing it from a place of peace and joy and love. He's doing it from a perspective of obligation. So he's got this obligation, this duty. And so he's doing all the stuff he's supposed to do. In the spiritual life, we would say he's praying, he's going to the sacraments. But because he's not doing it joyfully, and he's not doing it from this place of love, instead he's doing it because, I got it because this is what a good son does. I'm not like that person. I'm going to be good. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. And so what is the outcome of this? The outcome ends up becoming bitter and judgmental. On the other side, the outcome over here is desperation. So imagine in your own life, there's been times that we've been kind of bouncing back in between these things, right? Times where we're like, I don't need that God thing. I'm going to go out and just do my thing. That's where I'm going to find happiness. And then, there's this other side of it, times where we've been quite beautiful, quite pious, trying to be very perfect and holy. But eventually, no matter which side of that's on, it's going to break down. And then we have this point where we recognize something has to change. This is not working. In most of our lives, we keep doing the same things over and over again until finally it becomes so difficult we give up. One of the spiritual masters says, we finally turn and desire union with God, and a method that will actually get us there when we've had enough suffering. Great love or great suffering? Most of us take the route of great suffering. How long are you going to continue to suffer until you finally say, the peace that the world is trying to give me doesn't work? It's time to try the peace that Jesus gives me. It's time to turn away from all of these efforts to get the right job and the right house and the right vacation and ultimately the right cemetery plot. When do we finally say, I can't do it anymore? I give up. This surrender happens, which then hopefully will turn to a moment of questioning. Questioning. And this two-part question, who am I? Along with, who is God? Meanwhile, as the tree's growing, God is still here just abiding, you know? God isn't going anywhere. God's always in the middle of the tree. So we have this period of questioning and searching and asking. And what we find is that we are aware, present, and that God is ever-present love. Because in every moment where we've been aware and present, God has been there as well. So we do this, what is going on here? I give up, God. I got to try to figure out what's going on, because doing it this way brought me to desperation. Doing it this way made me bitter and judgmental. I just looked at all these people who weren't doing the right church stuff, and I just thought, well, they're not doing it right. They should be here doing it the way we're doing it. And that's not loving response. That's not living a joy-filled life. And over here, I just tried, so many trips. I mean, how many trips can you take? How many trips can you take before you realize, I can't get to peace and happiness through another vacation? How many new pairs of shoes can you buy? How many, whatever it is your thing. We all got something that we use, our kind of go-to, I need a shot of happiness, what am I going to do? And the ego will say, hey, I already know, and it's going to take you right to that same place you always go. And at one point, hopefully, if we're lucky, the day that we get to desperation, or the day that we finally recognize that we're bitter and judgmental, will be the best day of our life. We'll say, thank God for that suffering. Because that suffering finally caused me to really look at what's going on in my life. Meanwhile, God is just abiding. Because God's not going anywhere. So then we move on, and we have this process where we're going to do some meditation. We're going to do some contemplation. And that's going to lead us to unity, to oneness. And not only my own personal oneness with God, but my oneness with everyone and everything. Because ultimately, this isn't just about me, and happiness isn't about me just having good times. It's about this true felt understanding that what I am, so are you. And what you are, so is everyone else. And what's the difference between us and them? Is hopefully we've identified and we've seen it and we pulled the veil back and we know, hey, I'm not living that false egoic self anymore. I'm not going to do that, search for peace and happiness as the world has been trying to give it to me. Because that's failed over and over and over again. I'm going to live from the place in my being, the only place that's really real. And that place I'm going to live from is already peaceful and happy. The peace and happiness that we've talked about that is so fleeting is ultimately because our response to what's been happening is to say yes to good experiences and no to the bad experiences. And life has enough of this up and down stuff. We know there's enough times that we're going to be unhappy. So I want to wrap things up here. We're going to run out of time here briefly. not going to have any time for table discussions tonight, but I want to just bring out one last metaphor to try to help show us how this might work. So let me ask you the question. What do you think is the most famous line in movie history? Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. You're right. It is. According to 1,500 movie experts and critics, that is the most famous line ever. And who said that line? Clark Gable. But he said it as Rhett Butler. Okay? Another top 5. Toto. I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. Who said that? Dorothy. And who was Dorothy? Judy Garland. One more. Here's looking at you, kid. What's that from? Casablanca. Who said that? Humphrey Bogart. And who was Humphrey Bogart? Rick Blaine. Okay. So imagine you've just been cast for the starring role. You're either Dorothy or you're Rhett Butler. Okay? Whichever. And you're going to go perform. And so you're like, okay, I got to get my Rhett Butler on here. Let's go. And so you go and you do the play and you get so enmeshed in it. I mean, as soon as you walk out the door of your house, you're like, you just assume the role. You know, I'm Dorothy. You know, where's Toto? Let's go. We got to go. And then you go and you do the play. And after the play is over, everybody is just like, wow, that was amazing. That was fantastic. And you go back to the dressing room. And your best friend comes in and says, that was incredible. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'm not doing too well. And he says, but Steve, that was great. I said, Steve, I'm not Steve. I'm Rhett Butler, you know? And he's like, what? And I said, yeah, my daughter died, and Scarlett, I didn't treat her right, and I gotta get back something. I haven't done, and I'm all stressed out because I've totally assumed this life of Rhett Butler. That's what I'm doing. I've forgotten that I was Steve. And Steve was perfectly happy as he walked out the door, but now Steve is a mess because Steve thinks he's Rhett Butler. And, you know, the Civil War, and I lost all this money, and just, you know, it's all a mess. Or if you were Dorothy, then you're sitting there thinking, you know, Auntie M, I met this wizard, and your best friend is saying, what are you talking about? Because you totally lost yourself in the experience of being in the play. The analogy, of course, is this is what we've done with our own lives. God creates us at the moment of conception, infuses the soul into this body, intertwined, living as one until the moment of death. Then there'll be this separation, right? But during this time, we got so excited about the contents of our life experience. We're so excited about our cell phones and the people that might be calling us. And, you know, we're just so into, like, what might happen next in life. And, there's a new movie coming out tomorrow. And, boy, I can't wait for that. And then we're going to go do this. And then, next time we're going to do that. And then, we're so caught up in it. Hey, did you know she looked at me that way? That was kind of nice. Or did you know she doesn't look at me anymore? That's not very nice. Whatever the circumstances, we're so caught up and trapped in that we forgot that all along we've been here, union with God. This is where we started, and God has been right here this whole time. And our being, our soul is the trunk of this tree. The most essential part of your being has never been anywhere but union with God. We go off on these little branches, and we think, oh, this branch is everything. Have you seen my branch, by the way? I got a big branch. Look at this branch. And we're so caught up in all of that, we've completely forgotten that we're one with God. We always have to. We just have to turn. Just like the prodigal son, he's out there. He's doing his thing. He finally gets desperate enough. What does he say? I got to turn around and go back to where I had this. I had it. And I walked away. In that prodigal son story, everybody, we always kind of say, oh, I'm kind of like the younger one. I'm kind of like the older one. I did a little bit of both. Of course, the reason for the story is we're called to be the father. Because the father is the one who, despite a massive offense his younger son gave, was at peace. You want half of everything? Okay. We'll sell off this property. We'll divide up the money. There you go. Then he gets doubly offended by the older son, who should have been, under the customs of the time, should have been in the house, having the party, hosting it with dad. That's what the older son was supposed to be. When he comes in, his refusal to go into the house is a huge offense to his father. The father has to go out to him. In that culture, that would never happen. Never happen. The dad would never have gone out looking for the son and trying to make amends. It wouldn't happen. How could the father do that? Because the father knows who he is. He knows that he's one. He knows that he's living from this place of peace and happiness. The father isn't out on a branch. The father's right here. And that's where we're called to be in our own lives. I spent far too much time out on the branches on both sides, And it wasn't until I found out who I really am. It wasn't until I became clearly understanding in my own life that there's an aspect of my being that has never changed, is never going to change, is always happy, is never looking for something more, doesn't have any goals or desires, it's not trying to accomplish anything. It's just standing there, abiding as oneness with God. And in that place, what else would we ever want? When you're standing in union with your God, however briefly that might be for you, you know in that moment, I don't want anything else. There's nothing else this world has to offer me that I would trade for this moment. The people that died today experienced that face to face. The good news for us is we don't have to wait until we die. We can be at 9.9 even today. Even by the time you get home tonight, you can recognize the reality of your being. That God is desperately trying to get your attention all of your life to tell you how deeply you are loved. God has been waiting, watching down the road for you to come back. And all you have to do is turn around and to say, wow, there I am. I've been one with God all along. You might say, well, gee, that all sounds well and good, but I haven't played Rhett Butler or Dorothy, so I don't know how this is going to apply to me. Or, that sounds fine, but I'm so far out on a limb, I don't know how to get back to the place where I know I'm called to. Understanding, having this, what I would say tonight is an opportunity to have an intellectual understanding of the reality of your being. But that, unfortunately for most of us, isn't going to be enough to bring us to the place of the peace that passes understanding. The second step in this recipe for happiness that I've written about is to have this felt belief, to know within your being that this is who you are. Just knowing this intellectually, I mean, we know all kinds of things intellectually that have no real change in our life. Step one is we need the intellectual understanding. There it is. You have it. Okay. I understand that I'm my soul. Okay, I've always known that. How is it going to change my life? Well, now you have a little deeper understanding of how to describe your soul. Your soul is open and aware, always present every moment, always saying yes. And if you start to live from that place, then this experience will become more and more part of your felt belief. Next time we're going to talk about how do we make that happen? How do we make this become a felt belief? More than just an intellectual understanding, but a felt belief. And we're going to talk about the third step, which is detachment, which is a difficult concept for most of us. But we're going to drill down into this detachment so that it will make complete sense to you. So no longer will the word detachment seem like a difficult word for you that you want to stay away from. Instead, you'll know, be like, hey, I'm all about detachment. I mean, imagine you're going to become the person who says, the person walks up, oh, who are you? Oh, I'm aware presence. You know, I have this felt belief that I'm one with God. I'm completely detached from everything. I mean, they're going to think you're absolutely bonkers until they see you as the happiest person they know. Then they're going to want to get some more of that. We'll see you next time. Thanks for coming.